Eddie, what on earth do you think is going to happen this weekend with this main event? We've been waiting a long time, and now it's here. It almost feels a bit surreal. 2018 feels like a long time ago. Just wonder if you've picked a side, if you think you know what's going to happen?
I've never met two teams that believe they're going to win so much. I was just out there with Josh Kelly and Mick Conlon and Adam Booth, and they're like laughing and joking, 6 to 8 rounds, don't worry, we've got this. And again, you go into the other room and you've got Neil Marsh and Carl Greaves, easy, going to beat him up, wear him down. And it's just such a fascinating fight because it is a 50-50 fight. And I think probably last year with the momentum of David Avaneysan, probably felt like he was the favourite going into the fight, but there's something about Josh Kelly, looking into his eyes, listening to Adam Booth, seeing the training, seeing the shape he's in, knowing the weight that he's on right now, that makes me think he's a favourite in the fight. And I feel like Josh is the kind of guy that can do special things at special times. And that's what makes a star. And if he can go in and do a job and knock Avaneysan out, he becomes a star on Saturday night. And, sometimes you get a fighter that people talk about in the gyms, in the amateur code. Oh, this kid's unbelievable, we can do everything. And they never quite go on to do it in the pro game. Frankie Gavin, probably the greatest example of that. Maybe Josh Kelly's one of those guys, but we find out on Saturday, and I don't think he is. But it's remarkable, I was saying to some of the guys that this is career defining for Josh Kelly because he's only in this sport to fight at the elite level. He believes he's going to win the World Welterweight Championship, and defeat against Avaneysan, quite frankly, would disgust him in his mindset. That's where he believes his level is at. We're sitting here now talking about it's a 50-50. He doesn't see that. But things can unfold real quick in there, as we saw last Saturday night. And Avaneysan is a guy, you can't but not like him. Or you can't but like him, one of those two. And he's a proper fighter. He's a proud man. He's a strong man. He's a brave man. He has ability too. He's not, people talk about this is a style of two styles, if you like, or a tale of two styles. One guy that comes forward, he's relentless, and the other guy that's a boxer mover. They can both switch it up. I think Josh Kelly is going to stand and fight Avaneysan more than people think in this fight. I think he feels like he's the bigger, stronger man. Not sure if that's the case. Would be dangerous. But the problem is, if you fight off the back foot continuously, we saw it with Zelfa Barrett last week, you're going to be under fire constantly in the fight. And that doesn't always look good, So, as much as people are going to keep eagle eyes on the scorecards this week across all the fights, it's going to be interesting to see how those styles clash.
Not to discredit David Avaneysan, but boxing is a business for you, and you've put a lot of time and money into Josh Kelly. And one thing that twigged with me with what Adam Booth said is he hasn't delivered yet on the big stage, and nobody knows how good he is because he hasn't done it. With that in mind, I've heard you talk about it with fighters before. We don't want to waste time and money on someone that we don't think is going to do it. Does Josh Kelly have something to prove to you and Matchroom that actually he can be the flag bearer, the poster boy for that generation of Olympians that are just starting to get towards that level, the Buatsis and the Fowlers and stuff like that? Josh Kelly, does he have a little bit of a point to prove to you guys?
Do you know what? I don't think it's ever about proving a point to us. This sport's difficult enough to worry about impressing me or Matchroom. But of course, you're right, boxing is a business and we're always looking for that new star. You look at someone like Josh Kelly, he looks like he should be in a James Bond film or a Hollywood film, sitting at the bar with a white tuxedo on. The kid looks different gravy, doesn't he? But ultimately, if you can fight as well, we know we've got a star. We have an obligation and a duty to bring fighters through in the right way. It's not about just throwing them in and finding out quickly if our investment was worthwhile. It's about giving the opportunity to grow inside and out the ring, giving them experience, boxing all over the world, giving them the platform, using our team to make sure we turn them into a star outside of the ring as well. But at some point, that acid test comes. And I love it when the acid test comes because you are quite right. The money's been spent, the job's been done. Now, it's over to you, my friend. And you can prove now if you're going to be a headline act, if you could go on and be a pay-per-view fighter, if you could go on and be a world champion. And of course, of that crew out of the Rio Olympic team, they're all coming up to those crunch moments. Lawrence Okoli has faced several crunch moments, but he fights for the world title in a couple of weeks. You know, Anthony Fowler looking to rematch Scott Fitzgerald. He suffered a defeat. Joe Cordina back from injury, looking to fight for a world championship this year. You know, there's a lot of great fighters coming out of there. Whyte, I think, is, you know, one of the best talents in world boxing. So, but this fight is probably the first time that there's been a real 50-50 crunch test for an Olympian. You know, and I know that Fowler lost to Fitzgerald, but this is a different kind of fight. This is a European Championship that really feels like a World Championship eliminator. And these are the kind of fights that you need to emerge as a star.
We did a Zoom with Josh Kelly during the lockdown, and he did like a tick list. He said, David Avaneysan's getting ticked. And he said, Josh Kelly, Conor Benn is the next fight. Can that fight happen? And when and where, if Josh Kelly comes through it?
Well, I think timing is everything, and you know, fans hate to talk about timing, and I don't even like to talk about marination. I think it's a word that's bad for the sport, but
it's about barbecues.
That fight's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and really you've got 2 crunch tests coming up for those guys. This one for Josh Kelly on Saturday, and then April 10th for Conor Benn against Sammy Vargas. If both guys win in style, that fight is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Josh Kelly doesn't want to wait for that fight, nor does Conor Benn. I do want to wait for the world to return to normal. I think that sells out the O2. I think it's a massive fight for British boxing. It's a great fight. And victories for both men will make that fight bigger and bigger, to a point where, you know, again, that's a fight where both guys, and again, talking about money sometimes worse than talking about marination, but we are in the, you know, you saw Josh Warrington last week. You saw how brutal this sport is. For a fight like that, I want to make sure that I give the fighters what they deserve. And we're on the verge, off the back of these potential 2 victories, of having a really special fight for British boxing. 2 British welterweights in the ring, you know, and wouldn't it be great if it was for, you know, obviously for a world title, but something, you know, to move towards a world title, whether that's a final eliminator or whatever it is. And it's unusual to get those great British fights or even world fights with 2 young, unbeaten lions. You know, you see it in the lightweight division at the moment, Teofimo and Devin Haney, Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia. Get them in with each other.
Yeah, don't miss the opportunity.
Exactly, because we see great fights, don't we? I mean, Fury against AJ is a fight between 2 guys at their absolute prime, right? You see with Mayweather-Pacquiao or other fights, and that's what I hate about Crawford and Spence. Don't let it wait. These are 2 guys, they're in their prime now. Let's see it. And I think Benn and Kelly, that's a fight you could see 1, 2, 3 times.
Yeah, Khan Brook is one that you could say. I know you're going to say never say never, but 2030 they might decide. But Florian Marku, just with the 2 names that you mentioned there, Benn, Kelly, they're at a certain level. Florian Marku thinks he's close to that level or he's in that level. Can you add him into that mix if he beats Ryland Charlton?
I think so. I mean, no disrespect to Ryland Charlton, but you know, these are 2 guys that are looking to break out to that next level. I think that his performance against Jamie Stewart was incredibly flat. How that fight was a draw, I will never know, but it's done and dusted. He's got to make an impression, but you know, I put out on social media a little poll. I think Ryland Charlton's a favourite going into this fight, you know, and he's quite inexperienced as well. That's going to be 2 guys that are going to lose their shizzle on Saturday night, and I think it could just end up being an absolute war, because Ryland Charlton, you know, he came out against Joe Laws and battered him. I'm not saying he doesn't know what he's doing, but this is mad for him. Co-main event on a show like this at Wembley. I believe he only fights one way. If he comes out in the middle of the ring and starts having a tear-up with Florian Marku, this is going to be madness. But these are the kind of fights where you talk about, it's not just about the level you win at, it's the profile of the fight and the excitement for the fight. So the winner of this fight is rightfully calling Josh Kelly and Conor Benn. And also, don't forget Chris Congo against Mickinson as well. Brilliant domestic fight upcoming on the Dillian Whyte card. So the division's looking fantastic, especially domestically.
Johnny Fisher, he's got a great position, great platform here, but it is difficult because when a heavyweight turns over, it is just slightly different. We treat him differently. We all get overexcited. Is he the next great hope? He seems to have got a very level head on his shoulders, but can you move him as quickly as Sam Jones is talking? It must be quite difficult just to try and keep everyone's feet on the ground with this.
I think Sam Jones reminds me of me about 10 years ago. You know, he's got so much enthusiasm for the game. And as far as he's concerned, every one of his clients is Muhammad Ali. He's got 2 great heavyweights. Obviously, you know, he's got Joe Joyce as well, but 2 great young heavyweights in Solomon Dakers and Johnny Fisher. Solomon making his debut on March 20th. But Solomon's a guy that's boxed on the GB squad all around the world. Johnny Fisher is a young, raw heavyweight with bundles of ability and heart and chin, but massively inexperienced. And Johnny's smart. You know, Johnny's not going, yeah, I'm going to move fast. Johnny's got to move nice and slow. The problem with the heavyweight game is, even though Matt Gordon, by his own admission, has turned into a little bit of a journeyman, if you like, everyone's dangerous. I mean, he still lets his hands go. They can all whack. And it's like, you know, you just got to take it nice and slow with Johnny Fisher. The sparring he's been getting and what he's been showing in the gym is that we have a really good young prospect from Britain on the British heavyweight scene. And he's from Romford. I mean, that's my neck of the woods. So I love him already. My old man loves him already. And you know, this guy's got loads of fans in Essex. He's been down at Exeter University. He's got loads of fans. You can't do anything but love Johnny Fisher. But this is a very forgiving sport, and love really don't come into it. But I do believe he has bundles of ability. He's very strong, very heavy-handed, tough, and he's got a great trainer in Mark Tibbs. So let's start the journey on Saturday night.
AJ called Josh Warrington, which I thought was a real mark of class. Yeah. And there are parallels with AJ's situation. Have you spoke to either of them about what was discussed? I know we've seen the post, and I know you helped be the middleman to put them together, but do you know what they spoke about?
I don't actually, and I think they're both two very deep thinkers, and Josh has been struggling, Josh Warrington, since the defeat to come to terms with what happened. You know, and there are parallels between the defeat against Lara and the defeat against Andy Ruiz. Of course, Andy Ruiz was a world-ranked, world-class heavyweight, but Lara was, you know, that was almost a bigger shock. And I think that, you know, Josh has been struggling the last few days, and I thought it was a great touch from AJ to reach out to him and speak to him. And I think boxing, the community is a very special place. You know, everyone's got egos and everyone says things in interviews, but ultimately, you know, people like to help each other in this sport, particularly fighters and teams. And I said to Josh Warrington, you know, that I would, you know, he said maybe I could chat to AJ and he could give me his thoughts. And I said, yeah, and I phoned AJ, and he phoned him straight away, and they had a great FaceTime. And then Josh phoned me after and said, I feel like I could run 10 miles now. I can't wait for the rematch. So I think you got hurt. You know, it's got to hurt. And it's hurting Josh Warrington really bad. But it has to. Because when you bounce back from this, you have to have that desire, that thought process and that remembrance of what happened and how horrible it felt, how you were crying in your room, how you couldn't sleep at night. And I remember going to AJ's house, apartment he was staying at in New York after the Ruiz fight, and I knew how much he was hurting. You know, and it took him weeks, months, and we all know what a colourful character is, and he's so positive, and that was there on the outside. Yeah, you know, I'm gutted, but I'll be back. But deep down, it was burning him so bad because he's a winner, and Josh Warrington's a winner, and there's no shame in feeling the pain. There's no shame in crying when you get beat, when you want something so bad. But if Josh Warrington was sitting there this week saying, oh, well, you know, I've had a good run and it's a tough game and don't really want to do that again, I would say to him, you need to walk away from the sport. But when you're at home, you know, trying to put on a brave face with your family, but crying on the outside and on the inside, what that shows you is the fire still burns bright. And I saw that from AJ after the Ruiz fight, and I saw that against Lara. You know, people say, was it the right fight for them? You know, we're not in this game to manoeuvre and navigate people in easy fights. We have an obligation to you guys and to the fans to produce thrilling nights, and we knew that would be an exciting fight. But, you know, when Andy Ruiz beat AJ, people said, was that the right fight for AJ? Well, guess what? He went away prepared properly, and Andy Ruiz didn't win one single round against AJ in a rematch. And that's what Josh has got to do. It's incredibly dangerous to go back in that rematch, and it's a huge fight. But this time he'll do it in front of fans, and already the preparation begins. The fire burns bright to avenge that defeat. Probably in front of more people, certainly live and around the world, but it's a lonely, dark place, and it's a lonely, dark sport. And when you lose like that in front of a global audience, it's tough to take, but you brush yourself down, you come again. That's what winners do.
Last one is Deontay Wilder has started to do more and more interviews now after a period of not speaking. He says that he still wants to fight AJ. Can that fight happen down the line, or is there part of you that feels like that you want to say, well, you had your chance and get to the back of the queue?
I don't like that attitude. I mean, I probably liked that attitude a few years ago when I was like Sam Jones. Because you are bullish and you're and it's like, yeah, no. But actually, that doesn't do anyone any favours. If it's the right fight for AJ, not stylistically, but if it's the right commercial fight, I would never sit there and say, no, Wilder, you miss it. Listen, Deontay Wilder knows he turned down the deal of a lifetime to fight Anthony Joshua. But he made his bed, and respect to him, and I want to see him back in the ring. All we're focusing on is the Tyson Fury fight, and anything else happens in 2022, because those two fights will be our plan for 2021. So for me, I would like to see Dillian Whyte fight Deontay Wilder, but he has to deal with Povetkin. And we keep talking about, don't we? Last week we're talking about Warrington fighting Kanzu and Gary Russell, and this week we're talking about Josh Kelly fighting Conor Benn. The cards come down very quickly when you take your eye off the ball. So focus on the now, focus on the reality. And Deontay Wilder, I'm sure he'll be in big fights, but for us, we know our plans for 2021.